Alina had always believed that life would be kinder to her if she remained patient and gentle. As a little girl, she grew up dreaming of days filled with laughter, love, and warmth. But dreams often clash with reality, and her life took a sudden turn the moment her father passed away. He had been her greatest support, the person who tucked her in at night and reminded her she was loved. With his absence, the house that once felt like home quickly became a place of cold silence. Her stepmother, Clara, who had once pretended to care when her father was alive, changed overnight. The softness in her voice disappeared, replaced by complaints and harsh orders. She no longer looked at Alina as a child to nurture, but as a burden that weighed down her life. To Clara, Alina was a responsibility she didn't ask for, a mouth to feed when she herself was struggling to hold on to the lifestyle she desired. The days began to feel longer for Alina. Mornings were filled with tasks that had nothing to do with school or learning. She was made to clean, cook, and carry out chores while Clara lounged or left the house for her social gatherings. At night, Alina would curl up on her small bed in the corner of the cold room, remembering her father's voice and whispering to herself that things would one day get better. But no comfort came, and the bitterness in Clara's heart only grew. Bills piled up, and Clara became more desperate. She had debts to settle, promises she had made to people who demanded their money back. Instead of looking for honest solutions, Clara's mind wandered toward cruel ideas. She began to think of Alina not as family, not even as a child, but as a way to rid herself of her problems. It was unthinkable, yet Clara convinced herself that what she planned was practical. She told herself that Alina deserved to be placed somewhere else and that she, as a widow, deserved peace. In truth, it was greed that pushed her forward. One evening, Alina overheard Clara speaking on the phone in hushed tones. Though she could not hear everything, the words auction and arrangement sent a shiver through her body. She didn't understand at first. How could an auction have anything to do with her life? But Clara soon confirmed it the following day in her own cold way. "You will come with me tomorrow," she said sternly. "Wear something decent. Don't argue. It's for your own good." Alina wanted to ask questions, but the sharp look in Clara's eyes silenced her. That night, she sat on her bed staring at the moonlight that peeked through the window. She hugged her knees and whispered, "Papa, please guide me." She could not shake the sense of dread that filled her heart. The next morning, Clara dragged her along. The carriage ride felt endless, and Alina watched the streets pass by with a heavy heart. Her hands trembled as she realized they were heading to a part of the town she had never been to before. Tall, intimidating buildings loomed ahead, and the crowd outside looked nothing like the friendly faces she sometimes saw in the market. The air was heavy, filled with murmurs and an energy that felt strange to her. When they entered the hall, Alina's heart sank. It was a large room filled with rows of chairs where people in fine clothes sat, holding papers and whispering to each other. At the front, there was a stage with bright lights, and a man stood proudly as if he owned the place. His voice was loud and cheerful as he announced the beginning of the day's event. Clara pushed Alina forward, whispering sharply, "Stay quiet. Do not embarrass me." The realization hit Alina with the force of a storm. She was not there to watch. She was not a guest. She was part of what was about to happen. Her legs felt weak as she was led toward the stage. The crowd's eyes turned toward her, and she wished she could disappear. The man on stage introduced her as if she were nothing more than an object, using words that made her shiver. Her chest tightened, and tears filled her eyes. But she held them back. She did not want to give Clara the satisfaction of seeing her breakdown. Still, she could not hide the fear that showed on her trembling lips and the way her small hands clutched at her dress. The bidding began. Voices echoed through the hall, numbers shouted one after another. Each call felt like a chain wrapping tighter around her, pulling her away from any chance of freedom. Clara stood at the side, her face lit up with anticipation. She cared for nothing except the final number that would be called. Alina looked out into the sea of strangers, her eyes darting from one face to another. Most of them seemed indifferent, treating the event like entertainment. Some smirked, some laughed, and others simply raised their hands as if they were buying furniture. To them, she was not a human being with feelings and dreams, just a name on the list for the day. Her body shook and she closed her eyes, wishing desperately for a miracle. She thought of her father again, of his promise that she would never be alone. She whispered silently, "Please, Papa, if you can hear me, send someone," and then, just as the auctioneer prepared to call the final number, a deep, steady voice interrupted the room. "I'll take her." The hall fell quiet. Heads turned, whispers spread quickly. Alina's eyes flew open, and she searched for the source of the voice. There, toward the back of the room, stood a tall man in a dark suit. He had not participated earlier, had not shouted like the others. His hand was raised calmly, but his eyes were sharp, filled with determination. Clara blinked in surprise, then smiled when she realized the bid was higher than she expected. The auctioneer, sensing the man's authority, wasted no time in closing the deal. For Alina, the moment felt unreal. The noise around her faded, and all she could see was the stranger who had spoken up. She did not know his name nor his reasons, but there was something different about him. His presence alone seemed to silence the cruelty of the room. As the auctioneer declared the sale complete, Clara clapped her hands together in delight, already dreaming of the money she would soon hold. But Alina, standing on that stage with her heart racing, realized something else. Her life had just shifted. She didn't know where this road would lead, but for the first time in a long while she felt the faintest spark of hope. The room was still buzzing from the sudden interruption, but the sound of the man's calm voice lingered like an echo. Alina remained frozen on the stage, unsure if she should feel relieved or terrified. All around her, people whispered, their voices filled with surprise. It was unusual for someone to make such a bold bid without even raising their voice in competition. Yet this man had done it with quiet certainty, and no one dared challenge him after that. The auctioneer, who had been smiling widely at the excitement of the bidding, adjusted his tone quickly. His voice was firm now as he pointed toward the man at the back. "Sold," he declared. The wooden hammer struck the podium with a loud thud, and the deal was sealed. Clara, standing proudly at the side, had a triumphant look on her face. For her, this was victory. The amount promised for Alina was more than she had expected. She began to picture the clothes she could buy, the debts she could clear, and the comforts she could finally enjoy. She glanced once at Alina, not with kindness but with relief, as though she had finally rid herself of an unwanted burden. Alina's heart pounded. She did not understand what was happening, only that her stepmother had traded her away as if she were something to sell. The stage lights felt hotter, the crowd's stares sharper. She wanted to run, but her legs would not move. The man who had spoken finally stepped forward. His presence commanded attention, even though he did not raise his voice or show aggression. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a simple but elegant suit, he carried himself with quiet confidence. His face was calm, yet his eyes were sharp, the kind that missed nothing. He walked down the aisle slowly, and people stepped aside without being asked. When he reached the stage, he looked up at Alina. For a moment, their eyes met. Hers were wide with fear and confusion. His were steady, offering something she had not seen in a long time: assurance. The auctioneer handed him the papers to sign. He did so quickly, without hesitation, and then turned to Clara. "She will not be your concern any longer," he said in a low voice. Clara nodded eagerly, already counting her fortune in her mind. She didn't even glance back at Alina as she walked away, her footsteps quick, almost excited to leave the hall. The man reached out his hand, not forcefully, but gently. "Come," he said. His voice was deep, calm, and strangely comforting. Alina hesitated. Her instincts warned her not to trust strangers, yet something about him was different. Unlike the coldness of Clara's voice or the greedy shouts of the bidders, his tone held no cruelty. After a long pause, she placed her trembling hand in his. The hall seemed to grow silent as he led her down the steps. Whispers followed them, but he paid no attention. His stride was firm, each step carrying authority, as though no one in that room dared question him. Outside, the air was fresh, though Alina still felt suffocated by fear. The man guided her toward a black car waiting at the entrance. The driver quickly opened the door, bowing slightly in respect. Alina looked around nervously, expecting Clara to come running after her, but there was no sign of her stepmother. She realized with a sinking feeling that Clara truly had abandoned her. Inside the car, she sat quietly, her small hands folded tightly on her lap. She stole glances at the man beside her but said nothing. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the engine as the car drove through the streets. Finally, he spoke. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." His eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. "My name is Mr. Daniels." Alina nodded slightly, though her heart still raced. She wanted to ask him why he had raised his hand, why he had chosen her, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she turned to the window, watching the city fade into open roads and quiet landscapes. Mr. Daniels did not push her to speak. He understood the storm of emotions she must be feeling. He had seen too many children in similar situations, treated unfairly, discarded by those who should have protected them. To him, raising his hand that day had not been a matter of chance. It was a decision he could not ignore. As the car climbed the winding road leading to a large estate, Alina's eyes widened. The gates were tall and made of iron, guarded by men in uniform. Beyond them stretched gardens, fountains, and a grand house that seemed almost unreal to her. The car rolled smoothly through the gates, and the staff bowed respectfully as it passed. When they reached the entrance, Mr. Daniels stepped out first and then offered his hand again to Alina. She took it hesitantly, stepping onto the stone pathway. The estate was quiet, almost too quiet, but there was no sense of cruelty here. Instead, it felt safe, like a fortress protecting her from the outside world. A woman in her 50s, dressed neatly in a maid's uniform, approached. Her face lit up with warmth as she greeted Mr. Daniels. "Welcome back, sir," she said before glancing at Alina with gentle eyes. "And who is this?" "Her name is Alina," Mr. Daniels replied. "She will be staying with us now. Please make her comfortable." The maid smiled and bent down slightly so she was at Alina's level. "Welcome, dear. You are safe here." The kindness in her voice nearly broke Alina's fragile control. She nodded quickly, afraid that if she spoke, tears would spill. The maid guided her inside while Mr. Daniels followed at a calm pace. The interior of the house was breathtaking. Tall ceilings, polished floors, and walls decorated with paintings. Yet none of that mattered to Alina. What mattered was the atmosphere. It was quiet, not with the silence of neglect but with peace. No harsh voices, no slamming doors, no endless demands. The maid led her to a cozy room with a soft bed, fresh sheets, and a window that looked out onto the garden. "This will be your room," she said kindly. "Take some time to rest. Dinner will be served soon." Alina sat on the bed, her fingers sinking into the softness of the blanket. She had never known such comfort. The room felt warm, not because of the fireplace in the corner, but because it was hers, truly hers. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. Mr. Daniels stood at the doorway, watching quietly. He did not intrude, nor did he speak much. But before leaving, he said softly, "You are safe now, Alina. No one will harm you here." His words echoed in her heart long after he left the room. She sat by the window looking at the fading sun and felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. Her life had changed in the blink of an eye. She did not know who Mr. Daniels truly was, nor why he had chosen to raise his hand that day. But deep inside, she sensed that fate had placed her in the path of someone who would alter her future forever. That night, as she lay on the bed, she whispered to herself, "Papa, maybe you did hear me after all." For the first time since his passing, she slept without fear. The days that followed were unlike anything Alina had ever known. Each morning, the sound of birds outside her window woke her instead of Clara's sharp voice. The sunlight that streamed into her room felt softer, kinder, as if even nature itself was welcoming her into a new chapter of life. She still carried fear in her heart, unsure of what the future held. But there was no denying that her surroundings were nothing like the dark place she had come from. Mr. Daniels remained a quiet but steady presence in the house. He did not overwhelm her with questions or force her into conversations. Instead, he gave her space, allowing her to grow comfortable at her own pace. When he passed her in the hallway, he would offer a small nod or a gentle smile. It was not much, but to Alina it felt like a reassurance. He was there if she needed him, The staff treated her with respect as well. The maid, whose name was Mrs. Turner, often checked on her, bringing her warm meals and teaching her small things about the house. She never raised her voice, and whenever she spoke, there was kindness in her tone. Alina was surprised at how different it felt to be spoken to with care. It made her nervous at first, as though it could all vanish if she trusted it too quickly. But slowly, she began to respond with shy smiles and soft thank yous. One evening, as the family gathered in the dining room, Mr. Daniels motioned for Alina to sit beside him. The long wooden table was filled with food she had never seen before. Bowls of soup, plates of roasted vegetables, and baskets of fresh bread filled the air with rich aromas. Alina stared, unsure if she was allowed to take anything. "Eat as much as you want," Mr. Daniels said gently. "This is your home now." Her heart skipped. She hesitated, then carefully reached for a piece of bread. The warmth of it in her hands, the softness of it on her tongue felt almost magical. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Mr. Daniels watched quietly. There was no judgment, no criticism, only patience. Later that night, Alina sat by the fireplace in her room, thinking of her father. She whispered into the quiet air, "Papa, maybe this is what you wanted for me. Maybe you sent him." The thought brought tears to her eyes, but they were not the same kind of tears she once shed. These were tears of relief, of a fragile hope beginning to bloom. The following week, Mr. Daniels called for her to join him in his study. The room was filled with tall bookshelves and heavy wooden furniture. He sat behind his desk, looking serious but not unkind. Alina stood nervously at the door, unsure of what he wanted from her. "Come in," he said softly. "I want to talk to you." She stepped inside, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You've been through something very unfair," he began. "And I can't change the past. But I want you to know this. You are safe here. No one can treat you the way she did again. Do you understand?" Alina nodded slowly, though her throat felt tight. "You are not here because you owe me anything," he continued. "I did not raise my hand that day to take something from you. I raised it because I could not stand to see you hurt. All I ask is that you live your life freely without fear." His words struck her deeply. For so long, every action in her life had been tied to someone else's demands. Now here was a man telling her she had no debt, no burden to carry. It was hard to believe, yet the calm in his voice made it feel real. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. From that day on, her life began to change in ways she never expected. Mr. Daniels arranged for a tutor to visit the estate, giving Alina the chance to learn again. The tutor, a kind woman named Miss Green, introduced her to books filled with stories, poems, and lessons. At first, Alina struggled. She had been away from studies for too long, and her confidence was weak. But every time she stumbled, Miss Green encouraged her, and Mr. Daniels reminded her that mistakes were not failures, only steps toward growth. Alina found herself drawn to painting as well. Mrs. Turner once discovered her sketching flowers in the garden with a piece of charcoal. The maid quietly informed Mr. Daniels, who later surprised Alina with a set of paints and brushes. "For your gift," he said simply, placing the box on her desk. Her eyes widened, and for the first time a true smile appeared on her face. She painted every chance she got, covering her room with small canvases filled with color. Each brushstroke felt like a piece of her heart being healed. The townspeople began to whisper about Mr. Daniels's unusual decision. Many wondered why such a powerful man would involve himself in something so strange. Some criticized him, saying it was reckless, while others admired his boldness. But Mr. Daniels paid no mind to their words. When asked, he always answered the same: "No child should ever be treated as property." Alina heard these words repeated many times, and each time her chest swelled with gratitude. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer someone to be discarded. She mattered, and someone was willing to say it out loud. As weeks turned into months, Alina began to trust Mr. Daniels more. She still carried scars of fear, moments when she flinched at sudden sounds or doubted her worth, but each time he reassured her without needing grand gestures. He showed care in small ways, asking if she had eaten, checking her progress in studies, or simply listening when she had something to share. One afternoon, while walking in the garden, she found herself speaking more freely. Why did you choose me that day?" she asked quietly. Mr. Daniels stopped and looked at her. The sunlight fell gently on his face as he replied, Because I saw someone who needed to be saved, and I knew if I didn't raise my hand I would regret it for the rest of my life. His honesty touched her deeply. She looked down, tears forming again. But this time they were warm tears, not of fear but of gratitude. That night, as she painted by the window, she thought about the strange path her life had taken. Just weeks ago she had stood on a stage trembling, her heart breaking as strangers placed numbers on her worth. Now she was in a home where her worth was not measured by money but by her dreams and her laughter. She realized something important. Sometimes a single moment can change everything. A raised hand, a calm voice, an act of courage could turn despair into hope. And for her, that moment was the reason she was alive, free, and slowly finding joy again. As months slowly turned into years, Alina's life began to blossom in ways she had never imagined. What once felt like a story filled with fear and darkness now became a journey of light and healing. Every corner of Mr. Daniel's estate carried a sense of safety for her. The walls that had once intimidated her now felt protective, and the gardens that stretched out in vibrant colors became her sanctuary. Each morning she woke with new energy. Instead of dreading the sound of Clara's voice, she looked forward to hearing the birds sing and the laughter of the staff moving about their duties. The house was busy, but it was never unkind. People greeted her with smiles, asking how she slept or offering her a plate of warm food. Such simple gestures, which many might take for granted, felt like priceless treasures to her. Education became an important part of her new life. With Miss Green's tutoring, Alina not only caught up with her studies, but began to enjoy learning. She loved reading stories about brave characters who faced trials and overcame them. Sometimes she would stop mid-sentence, close her eyes, and imagine herself in those tales. Unlike before, where she felt powerless, she now believed she could be strong too. Mr. Daniels often visited during her study hours, not to test her, but to encourage her. He would glance at her books, nod in approval, and remind her that knowledge would always be her shield in life. Painting remained her favorite escape. Her canvases filled with color, each one telling a piece of her journey. Some showed bright flowers, others calm rivers or sunsets that seemed to mirror her own healing heart. One day, while she painted in the garden, Mr. Daniels stopped beside her. He studied her work silently, then said, "You see the world with depth most people never notice." His words stayed with her, giving her the confidence to believe that her talents mattered. But life outside the estate was not always kind. Rumors continued to circulate in town. People questioned why a wealthy man would take in a girl like her. Some whispered cruel assumptions, while others dismissed her presence as a passing act of charity. At first, these rumors reached Alina's ears and made her anxious. She worried that one day Mr. Daniels would listen to them and decide she did not belong after all. When she finally confessed her fears, Mr. Daniels looked at her firmly. "People will always talk," he said, "but their voices mean nothing compared to the truth we live here. You are safe and you belong. Don't ever let whispers steal your peace." His words gave her strength, and slowly she stopped listening to what the outside world said. She learned that sometimes silence was the best answer to doubt, and living her life fully was the best reply to criticism. Over time, Alina's trust in Mr. Daniels grew deeper. She began to see him not just as a savior, but as a father figure she had lost too soon in her real father. He never tried to replace her father, but he stood beside her in ways that mattered most, through his steady presence, his wisdom, and his quiet care. On difficult days when memories of her past haunted her, he would remind her that pain does not define a person's future. One particular evening stood out in her memory. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and she was sitting by the fountain sketching when Mr. Daniels joined her. He sat on the stone edge, watching the rippling water. After a long silence, he said, "Do you know why I raised my hand that day?" She looked at him curiously, waiting. "Because I saw a reflection of my own past," he explained. "I too once stood in a place where I felt powerless. I was not sold, but I was treated as though my worth was less than others. That day when I saw you, I could not let history repeat itself. I had the power to stop it, and so I did." His confession touched her deeply. For the first time, she realized that even strong, powerful people carried scars. She understood then that saving her had not been an act of pity, but one of empathy. He knew what it felt like to be trapped, and he had chosen to ensure she never lived that life again. As the years passed, Alina grew into a confident young woman. Her once timid voice now carried strength, Her shy smiles turned into warm laughter. She began to join conversations at the dinner table, sharing her ideas and thoughts. Mr. Daniels listened with pride, often encouraging her to dream bigger. He reminded her that the world outside might be challenging, but with courage and knowledge, she could face it. Alina also found herself forming bonds with the staff. Mrs. Turner treated her like a daughter, teaching her how to bake bread and plant flowers in the garden. The gardener showed her how to care for roses, explaining that even the most delicate blooms had thorns to protect themselves. Alina thought about that often, realizing the lesson applied to her own life too. There were moments when shadows of the past still crept in. Sometimes she woke at night, startled by memories of the auction hall and Clara's cold face, but unlike before, she was no longer alone. The sound of footsteps in the hallway or the warmth of the estate reminded her she was safe. On rare occasions when fear overwhelmed her, she would paint through the night, turning her pain into strokes of color until the morning sun brought her peace again. The community eventually began to accept her presence. Though whispers never fully died, people grew used to seeing her by Mr. Daniels' side during public events. At a charity gathering one evening, Mr. Daniels introduced her confidently as someone under my protection and part of my family. His words silenced many critics. Alina felt her heart swell, for she had finally found a place where she belonged, not just within walls, but within someone's heart. It was during these years that Alina truly began to believe in second chances. She no longer saw herself as a broken child discarded by her stepmother, but as a young woman rising from the ashes of her past. She discovered talents she never knew she had, dreams she had once buried, and courage she had thought lost. One day, while walking through the estate's library, she paused by a large mirror. She looked at her reflection and barely recognized herself. No longer was she the frightened girl with trembling hands and tear-streaked cheeks. She stood taller now, her eyes bright with determination. She whispered softly to her reflection, "You survived, and now you live." Though she never forgot the cruelty that had once threatened to consume her, she refused to let it define her. Mr. Daniels had given her more than shelter. He had given her the gift of dignity, the freedom to dream, and the strength to embrace life again. And as she stood in that grand house, surrounded by people who cared for her, she knew one thing for certain: her journey was far from over. This was not the end of her story, but the beautiful unfolding of a new beginning. Years passed gently, and Alina grew into a young woman who carried both grace and quiet strength. The frightened girl who once trembled on a stage in an auction hall was now someone who walked with her head held high. Time inside Mr. Daniels' estate had changed her completely. The walls that once seemed strange had become home, and the people who worked there had become her extended family. More importantly, she had found a father figure in Mr. Daniels, someone who had shown her the meaning of kindness, protection, and dignity. The world outside had changed too. No one whispered about her in the same way anymore. Instead, people had come to admire the courage of Mr. Daniels' decision and the transformation of the girl he had saved. They often saw her at community gatherings, sometimes helping with charities, sometimes giving quiet speeches about hope and opportunity. Her words were not loud, but they touched hearts because they came from a place of truth. People respected her, not because of her beauty or her connection to Mr. Daniels, but because of her sincerity. For Alina, every step of her journey felt like a miracle. She had learned to study, to paint, to dream, and to share her thoughts without fear. She no longer avoided her reflection in the mirror. She smiled at the young woman staring back, proud of how far she had come. Each brushstroke on her canvas was now filled with confidence instead of pain. Each word she spoke carried the weight of lessons she had once thought she would never live to learn. One day, while walking through the gardens with Mr. Daniels, she paused to admire the roses. Their deep red petals reminded her of the lessons the gardener had shared years ago, that beauty can still exist alongside strength. She turned to Mr. Daniels and said softly, "Do you ever think about that day, the day you raised your hand?" He looked at her, his expression calm but thoughtful. "I do," he admitted. "Not because I regret it, but because I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't." Alina's voice trembled slightly as she replied, "I don't like to think about it. That day was the worst of my life, and yet it also became the best, because it brought me here." Mr. Daniels smiled faintly, his eyes warm. Sometimes life writes stories in ways we don't understand. But I believe you were always meant to find your way here. You were always meant to rise. His words stayed with her long after their walk ended. That night she sat by her window, painting the sunset as it faded into stars. She thought about the long road she had traveled, from the fear of being abandoned to the comfort of being loved, from the pain of being treated like an object to the joy of discovering her worth. She realized that her life was proof that even in the darkest of times, light could break through. Years later, Alina's growth became even more evident. She was no longer just a girl who had been saved. She had become someone capable of saving others. She began to speak publicly about her journey, not with bitterness but with hope. She shared her story to encourage children who felt forgotten, to remind them that they mattered, and to show them that the world could change with one act of courage. People listened. They admired the way she spoke simply, without anger but with deep truth. Many young girls and boys looked up to her, seeing in her the strength to endure their own struggles. Slowly, she became a symbol of resilience, proof that pain could be turned into purpose. Her stepmother, Clara, had long since faded into irrelevance. The fortune she once gained had been spent quickly, and her greed left her empty and alone. News of her downfall eventually reached Alina, but instead of feeling satisfaction, Alina felt something else: pity. She realized that Clara had lost far more than money. She had lost the chance to know what love truly was. Alina chose not to dwell on her. The past no longer controlled her life. Mr. Daniels watched Alina's transformation with pride. To him, she was living proof that his choice had been the right one. He often thought back to that fateful day in the auction hall, remembering how the room had fallen silent when he raised his hand. He had not known then how much that decision would change both their lives, but now, seeing the confident young woman before him, he understood. Sometimes one moment can rewrite an entire future. On Alina's 18th birthday, the estate was filled with joy. The staff decorated the dining hall with flowers, and Mr. Daniels arranged a gathering to celebrate her. As she stood surrounded by people who loved her, she realized something powerful. She was no longer the frightened child who begged for help. She was a woman ready to step into the world with courage and dreams. During the celebration, Mr. Daniels gave a short speech. "The day I raised my hand, I thought I was saving a child," he said. "But over the years, I realized something greater. She saved me too. She reminded me of compassion, of hope, of the power of doing what is right even when the world doubts you. Today, I celebrate not just her birthday, but the light she has become for us all." Tears filled Alina's eyes as she listened. She hugged him tightly afterward, whispering, "Thank you for everything." In the years that followed, Alina continued to grow, study, and give back to the world. She pursued her art, creating paintings that captured the beauty of resilience. Her exhibitions drew attention, not just because of the skill of her hand, but because of the story behind each piece. People who looked at her paintings felt the emotion she poured into them, the sorrow of her past, the healing of her present, and the hope of her future. Whenever someone asked her what kept her strong, she always answered the same way: "Because someone once believed I was worth saving." Her story traveled far, inspiring many. She became a reminder that even in a world that could be cruel, there were still people willing to stand against injustice, people willing to raise their hands when it mattered most. Alina never forgot her father's words from childhood, nor the night she whispered to him for guidance. She believed in her heart that his spirit had led Mr. Daniels to her that day. She carried that belief with her always, letting it guide her through life's challenges. As she stood years later in her own home, surrounded by friends and a family she had chosen, she looked back at her journey. She thought of Clara's cruelty, the auction hall's cold lights, the moment of despair when she thought all hope was gone. And then she remembered the calm voice, the raised hand, the act of kindness that changed everything. She smiled to herself and whispered softly, "That day was not the end of me, it was the beginning." For Alina, the world was no longer a place of fear, but a canvas of endless possibilities. She had been saved, yes, but she had also learned how to live, how to give, and how to shine. And that, she knew, was the true miracle of her story.